All right, welcome back to ABA exam review and the continuation of our BCBA practice exam series, where we're going through another set of questions together and breaking them down. If you're new to the channel, welcome. If you're returning, welcome back. Please like, subscribe, and share. Check out behavioranalyststudy.com for all of our study materials, including our combo pack. When you pass your exam, let us know so we can include you in the Sunday shout out. Work hard, study hard. Let's get going. Will is in an ABA program and is starting his class on experimental design. He wants to practice using experimental designs for his own behavior. He decides that he's going to decrease the amount of carbs he eats on a daily basis. What type of experimental design would likely work best if he is not interested in removing the intervention at any point? So Will wants to use an experimental design and practice an experimental design on a behavior that already exists in his repertoire. And what behavior is that? It's eating carbs. So when you see an experimental design question that is looking to increase or decrease an existing behavior and a solitary behavior without multiple settings and multiple participants and multiple interventions, start thinking changing criterion designs. Because we know, in this case especially, Will does not want to remove the intervention. So if he doesn't want to remove the intervention, that rules out the withdrawal design. We know he hasn't talked about using multiple interventions or trying to alternate between interventions. So the multi-element design doesn't make a whole lot of sense since he's trying to target the decrease in carbs explicitly. So what makes the most sense is a changing criterion design. And even though the changing criterion design is not used as frequently as the other designs, it's very good for increasing or decreasing single target behaviors that are already in your repertoire. And then finally, the multiple baseline design doesn't necessarily fit. We're not across settings, we're not across people. It's just Will trying to decrease how many carbs he's eating. He doesn't want to remove the intervention, so the simplest explanation is going to be to use a changing criterion design. In a long-term study on the effectiveness of a diabetes management program, a number of participants dropped out due to the relocation or loss of interest. Those who remained in the program showed significant health improvements. The researcher worries that the dropouts may have affected the study's conclusions. What threat to internal validity is a concern in this situation? When we talk about threats to internal validity, we're talking about what is potentially messing up our functional relationship. With any study, we want to prove that our intervention or our independent variable is controlling the dependent variable. In this case, what is occurring? Well, we have a number of participants dropping out of the study because of relocation or loss of interest. And so if we have a lot of dropouts, the participants who remained, that might just be a confound because they might have stayed in because they were seeing progress when the other participants weren't. So that has potential to kind of make the data questionable. So in this case, what do we call it when participants are dropping out for whatever reason? A, history. History has to do with the learning history of the participant or the experience of the participant, not necessarily whether or not they left or stayed in the study. Maturation has to do with the natural growth and development of participants. Again, nothing to do with dropping out of the study. What we're looking for here is C, attrition. Attrition is related to losing participants as the study goes on for whatever reason. And then regression to the mean is when we eventually return to the average of something, which is not what we're discussing here. We want to be on the lookout for threats to internal validity because we want to try to control for confounds. An occupational therapist is teaching a child to respond to social questions in a work environment. Instead of following a strict script, the therapist varies the wording, tone, and context of the questions. For example, they ask, "What's up? How are you doing today? What's new with you? And how's everything going?" What generalization strategy is occurring? So let's think about this strategy. The therapist is teaching the child to respond to social questions. They're using a lot of different examples, different wordings, different tones, and different context. Now, why would we do that? Well, if we're trying to generalize, we're trying to meet all what the environment may have in store for the child. The child may hear what's up, maybe how are you doing today, what's new with you. These are actual phrases the child is going to have to respond to at some point. And so by teaching them explicitly, we're encouraging generalization. And so when this gets a little confusing, is you have these ideas of programming common stimuli, multiple exemplar training, and training loosely. What is the difference between these items? Well, when we train loosely, you're varying non-critical aspects of the environment or the teaching procedure. In this case, the wording, tone, and context are critical because that is what the child is actually going to respond to. So now we have to ask ourselves, are we programming common stimuli or are we multiple exemplar training? Well, since we aren't explicitly saying that these phrases are exclusive or part of this work environment, and instead the therapist is just trying to teach all kinds of different variations of what the child needs to learn, we are multiple exemplar training, different stimuli, different phrases. In this case, you might use different people. We're just trying to train as many possible responses and stimuli as possible. Programming common stimuli is when it's specific to that environment. And then, of course, indiscriminable contingencies has to do with hiding when the consequence is available, but we're not talking about the reinforcement that is going to be delivered. We're specifically talking about these exemplars that are being trained by this occupational therapist. A discontinuous measurement procedure is chosen to monitor cooperative play within a 20-minute period. The chosen procedure is a whole interval procedure using 2-minute intervals to measure how often a child interacts with their peers. Considering the chosen behavior and the chosen measurement system, which of the following is an issue that may arise? So before we get into the answer choices, let's attack the question. We know we are using a discontinuous measurement procedure, which already causes issues because we're only taking a sample of behavior. Now we have a 20-minute interval broken into, or 20-minute period broken into 2-minute intervals. What jumps out at you about 2-minute intervals? Well, to me, they're quite long. The longer the interval, the less sensitive the data is going to be, especially with whole interval, right? Now, the behavior has to happen that entire 2 minutes to count. And so we have these issues that are already arising and that we're already predicting. So let's see what our answer choices say. A, the measurement system may overestimate the occurrence of the behavior. Well, whole interval is unlikely to overestimate occurrence because that behavior has to happen for the entire 2 minutes for it to count. And so we're only going to have 10-minute intervals. So if that behavior is not happening for a very long time, it's very unlikely we're going to overestimate how often it happened. It's much more likely we're going to underestimate with 2-minute intervals. Because if that behavior happens for 1 minute and 50 seconds, we're not going to count it as a response. And in that case, you are very likely underestimating just how often the behavior is occurring. C, the interval length is too short and may lead to more sensitive data collection. 2-minute intervals is very long in an interval recording system. It's not going to make data more sensitive. It's going to make it less sensitive because we need a lot of responding to get even one response. So it's not very sensitive at all. And then D, whole interval recording should not be used to measure this type of behavior. Maybe, maybe not. It depends on the child, but that's not what we're here to evaluate. The main issue here is with such a long interval time, you may underestimate the occurrence of behavior. Jordan is teaching Sam, an adult with developmental disabilities, how to independently use public transportation to get to work. The sequence of steps includes checking the bus schedule, locating the correct bus stop, boarding the bus, paying the fare, identifying the correct stop, and exiting the bus. During training sessions, Jordan works with Sam on the entire sequence each time, providing prompts or assistance only when necessary for specific steps. What chaining strategy is this? Task chain questions should be very straightforward for you because there's not a lot of stuff they can do to try to confuse you. Let's think about this. If we're having a chaining strategy, where the entire sequence is being worked on each time and prompts are only given when necessary, well, what kind of chain could that possibly be? It doesn't matter the steps in this particular chain because the question just wants to know what kind of strategy it is. So it's a long question, but it's an easy one. We're teaching the entire sequence every time and only giving prompts when necessary. So is that a forward or backward chain? Well, no. With a forward or backward chain, we're not teaching the chain, the whole sequence each time. We're teaching individual steps up to a point and then prompting for the rest. Forward chaining starts at the beginning. Backward chaining, you prompt from the beginning and then teach that last step. What we're doing here is a total task chain. We're teaching the entire sequence every time and only giving assistance as necessary. An interruption strategy or a behavior chain interruption strategy is when you're intentionally interrupting or altering the chain to evoke new behaviors. Clearly, not what's going on here. We are simply using a total task chaining strategy in this example. Pretty easy question. We trust our prep, answer it, move on. A counselor teaches a client stress management techniques such as deep breathing and positive self-talk that the client can use in various situations at work, home, or social events. The counselor hopes to empower the client to monitor their own behavior and promote lasting behavior change across different environments. What strategy does this represent? So let's think about the question. We're always looking at the question first before answer choices. We've got a situation where the counselor is teaching stress management techniques such as deep breathing and self-talk to the client. They want to empower the client to monitor their own behavior and promote lasting behavior change across different environments. So the counselor's goal is to have the client not only manage their own stress, but to monitor their own behavior. So to you, with just a prediction, what does that sound like? To me, that sounds like teaching self-management. I want you, the client, to manage your own stress and monitor your own behavior. Self-management is the best gift we can give to someone because that means they're not dependent on other people for that management. Train to generalize, that is not a strategy, that is what we should be doing. So we should always be teaching and training and planning to generalize. Indiscriminable contingencies, again, is disguising consequences, not what's happening here. And then general case analysis is when we're creating our generalization plan, we go into the particular environment or natural setting and try to identify what we might need to focus on for generalization. With this particular question, however, the focus is on stress management of their own stress and monitoring their own behavior. So that is most related to teaching self-management. Caitlin is walking through the park when she hears something behind her, which causes her heart to start beating rapidly. At the same time, she hears a child laughing on the playground. Now, Caitlin's heart starts to beat rapidly when she hears a child laughing. The child's laugh will be considered a blank relative to Caitlin's heartbeat. Okay, so we have a respondent conditioning question. And how do we know that? Because we have a situation where stimuli are being paired and they're eliciting reflexes. So we have heartbeat, which is the reflex. So let's break it down, right? Caitlin is walking through the park. She hears something behind her, which causes her heart to start beating rapidly. So in this case, let's call this something behind her the unconditioned stimulus. We'll call heart beating rapidly the unconditioned reflex. At the same time, she hears a child laughing. Now, Caitlin's heart starts to beat rapidly when she hears a child laughing. So since that child laughing is now eliciting the heartbeat, what has that child's laughing become? Well, it's changed from a neutral stimulus to a conditioned stimulus. And now Caitlin's heartbeat in that context is a conditioned reflex. And so the child's laugh is now considered a conditioned stimulus in this context. Respondent conditioning questions are as straightforward as that. Simply identify what's your unconditioned stimulus, what is it being paired with, and then what is that eliciting? What reflex is being elicited from that unconditioned and conditioned stimulus? A behavior analyst implements a token economy system in a classroom to increase students' on-task behavior. Students earn tokens for staying on task, which they can later exchange for rewards such as extra recess time, special privileges, or small prizes. To ensure the token economy remains effective over time, which of the following practices should the behavior analyst avoid? All right, so we're thinking about what practice should they avoid? And it's very important we read carefully, right? If we are reading too quickly, we might pick an answer that we shouldn't avoid. But the question is explicitly saying, what do we want to avoid to make sure a token economy remains effective? And that is simply the question here. So A, delivering tokens continuously when starting out with a token economy. That is typically a good idea. Continuous reinforcement, establishing the pairing between the tokens and the behavior and the backup reinforcers is typically a good idea. B, update the backup reinforcer menu on a regular basis. Also a great idea. We want the backup reinforcers to stay motivating. We don't want our learners to satiate on backup reinforcers. So if that menu is always changing, there will always be new options. C, modify the token requirements for backup reinforcers unpredictably. Do we want our token economy to be unpredictable and unknown? No, we want our economy to be explicitly known. We want our clients, our students to know exactly how they're going to earn their tokens, and then what are they going to exchange them for. If they don't know what their backup reinforcers are, those tokens can lose a lot of their reinforcing and motivating properties. So C is something you want to avoid. D, perform individual preference assessments on each student. That is ideal. If you have the time and resources, every student should get their own preference assessment. What are we looking to avoid? We don't want to be unpredictable. So modifying token requirements for backup reinforcers unpredictably is something we want to avoid. A type 1 error is also known as a blank. All right, kind of a teaching question just in case it comes up. It may not. But if you're asked about a type 1 error, what is that known as? It's also known as a false positive, basically saying our data show our intervention was effective when it really wasn't. That's a type 1 error. It's a false positive. This is just, again, kind of a learning question as we're practicing. Nothing more, nothing less. If you see a type 1 error, think false positive. Professor Xavier is analyzing baseline data from his latest research project. The data is from his participants in a multiple baseline study. Xavier's visual analysis reveals the data to be highly variable, which is causing Xavier to hesitate moving from baseline to intervention. Xavier's decision is likely based on what? Let's think about this. We're looking at Xavier's decision, and what is he basing his decision on? What is his decision? We know he's analyzing baseline data, and the data is highly variable, so he doesn't want to move from baseline to intervention. What strategy or what concept would Professor Xavier be making that decision on? What would that be called? A variable state strategy. Well, the data are variable, but it is not a variable state strategy that Xavier is using. He's using what we would consider a steady state strategy. And a steady state strategy typically says we want our baseline data as stable as possible before we move into the intervention phase. Now, stable data might be going upwards in trend. It might be going downwards in trend. But the point is we want it stable as possible. Baseline logic has to do with prediction, verification, and replication, not necessarily what Xavier is doing here. And then successive approximation is there to throw you off. You might get answer choices occasionally that are simply checking your fluency. Because if you're fluent, successive approximation, you're immediately eliminating that answer. It has to do with shaping. Xavier's decision is most likely based on a steady state strategy. Thanks for watching. Be sure to like, subscribe, and share. Check out behavioranalyststudy.com for all of our study materials. When you pass your exam, please let us know so we can include you in the Sunday shout out. Work hard, study hard. We'll see you soon.